never thought I'd be plotting revenge at 68. The morning I decided to destroy my husband's career, I was arranging white camellias in the antique crystal vase his mother had given us for our wedding in 1978. 45 years of marriage, 1 daughter, countless dinner parties where I played the perfect anchor's wife. All of it suddenly felt like an elaborate performance I'd grown tired of watching. "You can't even remember where you put your reading glasses," Gregory had said on live television the night before, his voice dripping with that practiced charm that made Charleston housewives swoon. Sometimes I wonder if my dear wife would forget her own name if I didn't remind her. But here's what Gregory didn't know about memory loss. Sometimes forgetting the small things makes you remember what really matters. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I suppose I should start at the beginning, though these days I'm never quite sure where that is anymore. Memory, I've learned, isn't a straight line, but more like a river with eddies and currents, sometimes rushing forward, sometimes pooling in quiet places you didn't expect to revisit. My name is Lena Marlowe, and for most of my adult life I've been known as Gregory Marlowe's wife. You might recognize the name. Gregory anchors the evening news at WCHS-TV here in Charleston, has done so for nearly 30 years. Before that, he was the golden boy of local radio, all velvet voice and southern charm. I was the woman behind, the man, as they say, the one who made sure his ties were straight and his ego was fed. But before I was Mrs. Marlowe, I was Lena Hutchins, and I directed theater. Not Broadway, mind you, but respectable regional productions at the Charleston Stage Company. I had a gift for seeing the whole picture, for knowing exactly when an actor should pause for effect, when the lights should dim, when the audience needed to lean forward in their seats. I understood timing, dramatic tension, the delicate architecture of a good story. I gave that up when Gregory's career started taking off. Someone had to manage the social calendar, host the dinner parties, smile graciously at charity galas while wearing the right dress and saying the right things. Someone had to be the anchor's elegant wife, and I was good at it. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back to theater once things settled down. Things never settled down. Our house sits in the historic district, a grand antebellum beauty, with wraparound porches and Spanish moss draped like lace curtains over the live oaks. It's the kind of house that looks perfect in Charleston Living magazine, which it has, twice. The parlor where I arrange flowers every morning overlooks a garden that I've tended for decades, though lately I've had to write myself notes about which plants need water and when. The memory issues started small. Misplaced car keys, forgotten appointments, names that slipped away like morning mist. At first, Gregory found it charming in that patronizing way men sometimes do. "My absent-minded professor," he'd say, kissing my forehead like I was a child who'd lost her mitten. But charm has a way of curdling when it becomes inconvenient. Dr. Shanthi Rao, my neurologist, a lovely woman with gentle hands and kind eyes, explained it to me in terms I could understand. Think of your brain like a vast library, Lena. Some books are becoming harder to find, but the most important ones, the ones that really matter to you, those tend to stay right where you can reach them. The most important books, as it turns out, contain all my years in theater. I can still recite entire passages from Our Town and The Glass Menagerie. I remember every detail of my first directing job, a production of Steel Magnolias that made half the audience cry and the other half laugh until their sides hurt. I remember the feel of standing in the wings, watching actors I'd guided become something more than themselves under the lights. What I've been forgetting are the everyday pretenses. The careful smile at charity events where I don't remember anyone's name but pretend I do. The polite laughter at Gregory's jokes that stopped being funny years ago. The practiced responses to neighbors who ask how our dear Gregory is doing, as if I'm merely an extension of his public persona. Our daughter Naomi lives in Columbia now, teaches 4th grade, and raises 2 teenagers mostly on her own since her divorce. She calls every Sunday and I can hear the careful way she speaks to me, as if I'm made of spun glass that might shatter if she says the wrong thing. She inherited my eyes. Deep brown, what Gregory used to call bourbon eyes, back when he still noticed such things, but her father's stubborn chin. "Mom, are you taking your medications?" she always asks. "Yes, sweetheart." "And Dad's being supportive?" That's where I usually pause, looking out at the garden where the gardenias are blooming. Despite my increasingly haphazard care, how do you tell your daughter that her father has turned your medical condition into material for his morning radio segments? That he's started making jokes about senior moments and getting old gracefully that everyone knows are about me? "Your father is being very helpful," I tell her instead. Gregory's study sits at the back of the house, lined with awards and photographs of him shaking hands with minor celebrities and local politicians. There's a picture of us from our 10th anniversary, dancing at the country club while the photographer captured what the society pages called Charleston's most golden couple. I'm wearing emerald green silk, and Gregory's hand is on the small of my back, both of us laughing at something I can no longer remember. I used to dust that photo every week. Now I can't recall the last time I looked at it directly. The study is where Gregory retreats each evening after the 6 o'clock news, scotch in hand, scrolling through social media comments and local newspaper mentions of his broadcasts. He monitors his public image the way a gardener tends prize roses, always pruning and adjusting and worrying about appearance. "Lena." He'll call from his leather chair, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Did you remember to call the caterer about the Rotary Club dinner?" Sometimes I did remember. Sometimes I didn't. Increasingly, I found myself making lists, leaving notes in my own handwriting that felt like messages from a more organized version of myself. But here's what Gregory failed to understand about memory and theater. Both require you to know your audience. In theater, you learn to read a room, to sense when the energy is shifting, when people are with you or against you. You develop an instinct for timing, for knowing exactly when to deliver the line that will change everything. Memory, loss doesn't erase instinct. If anything, it sharpens it. I started noticing things, the way Gregory's voice changed when he answered certain phone calls, stepping out onto the back porch and lowering his tone to that intimate register I remembered from our early courtship. The unfamiliar scent on his shirts, something floral, and younger than the perfume I'd worn for 20 years. The sudden interest in working late, attending networking events I was conveniently not invited to. "You wouldn't enjoy it, darling," he'd say, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. "Just shop talk and boring industry people." I began to feel like a supporting character in my own life, watching from the wings while the leads played out scenes I wasn't invited to join. The camellia bushes in our front garden have been blooming magnificently this spring, their waxy white petals falling like snow on the brick walkway. I've always loved camellias. They're sturdy flowers, elegant but not fragile, beautiful even as they're fading. Each morning I cut fresh blooms for the crystal vase in the parlor, the one Gregory's mother gave us with the subtle chip on the rim that only I seemed to notice. Mrs. Eleanor Marlowe had been a formidable woman, steel wrapped in magnolia blossoms, who never quite approved of her son marrying a theater person. She preferred women who lunched and chaired committees, not ones who spent their evenings in darkened playhouses making magic happen under borrowed lights. Gregory needs someone who understands his ambitions, she'd told me once, not long after our engagement. Television is a demanding mistress. She wasn't wrong, though I suspect she didn't anticipate how literally her metaphor would eventually play out. The vase sits on the antique sideboard that belonged to my grandmother, surrounded by family photographs and small treasures accumulated over decades of marriage. There's a silver-framed picture of Naomi's college graduation, one of Gregory receiving his first Emmy for investigative journalism, another of the three of us at Christmas 5 years ago, before the memory issues became something we had to navigate, around like furniture in a darkened room. I've been arranging flowers in that vase for so many years it's become meditation, a daily ritual that grounds me when everything else feels like it's shifting beneath my feet. Cut the stems at an angle, under running water, strip the lower leaves, arrange them so each bloom has space to breathe, while supporting the others. It was while arranging camellias last Tuesday that I overheard Gregory on the phone in his study, door ajar, voice carrying that particular warmth he reserved for people. He was trying to charm. "I know it's complicated, sweetheart, but we just need to be patient a little longer, sweetheart." I hadn't been his sweetheart in years. The theater taught me to be still, to listen, to gather information before making my entrance. So I stood there in my kitchen, white petals scattered across the marble countertop like evidence of something beautiful being carefully dismantled, and I listened to my husband plan his life without me. "She's not getting any better, Celeste. The doctors say it's progressive. I can't be expected to put my life on hold indefinitely. Celeste, as in Celeste Quinn, his co-anchor at the station, the ambitious young woman from Atlanta who joined the news team 2 years ago with her perfect smile and impeccable diction, 20 years younger than me, 15 years younger than Gregory, with honey-colored hair that never seemed to move out of place, even in Charleston humidity. I'd met her at station Christmas parties, watched her defer politely to Gregory's opinions, while her intelligent eyes catalogued every detail for later use. She had that particular southern sweetness that could cut glass when necessary. "I understand," Gregory was saying, "but we have to be careful about the timing. My image. His image. Always his image." I finished arranging the camellias with hands that were steadier than they'd been in months. There's something clarifying about betrayal, I've discovered. It burns away everything except what actually matters. That evening, Gregory came home from the station full of stories about his day, the way he always did, settling into his routine of scotch and self-importance. I served dinner, bourbon-glazed, salmon with roasted vegetables, and listened to him complain about budget cuts and declining viewership and the general decline of journalism standards. "You know what I told them in the production meeting today?" he said, cutting into his salmon with the silver knife that had been a wedding gift. "I said we need to get back to human interest stories, things that really connect with people. Not just politics and crime, but real stories about real families dealing with real challenges. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so painful." "That sounds wonderful, dear," I said, refilling his wine glass. "Speaking of which, I might be working late more often. We're developing some new segments. And you know how these creative projects can be. Very demanding." Creative projects? Was that what he was calling her? I nodded and smiled and played my part, the way I'd been doing for decades. But backstage, in the quiet theater of my mind, I was already planning my final performance. The medical report arrived on a Thursday morning in April, delivered in a crisp white envelope that felt heavier than paper should. Dr. Rao had warned me it was coming, the formal documentation of what we'd been dancing around for months, with careful euphemisms and gentle explanations. Mild cognitive impairment, with probable progression to Alzheimer's disease. There it was, typed in clean clinical language that reduced the slow unraveling of my mind to medical terminology. I sat in the morning sunlight streaming through our kitchen windows, reading words that felt like a script for a play I'd never auditioned for. The report was thorough. 12 pages of test results, brain scans, and careful observations about my declining performance in areas of memory, attention, and executive function. Dr. Rao had been kind during our appointment the week before, explaining that this diagnosis was actually good news in its way. We're catching it early, Lena. There are medications that can slow the progression, strategies we can implement. You still have time. Quality time. Time. The one thing I'd been taking for granted while politely arranging flowers and attending charity luncheons and pretending my husband's growing disdain was just the natural evolution of a long marriage. Was still reading when Gregory came down for breakfast, already dressed in his navy suit and striped tie, checking his phone for overnight news alerts. His morning routine was as predictable as sunrise. Coffee black, toast with orange marmalade, quick scan of 3 news websites, out the door by 7:30. "Anything interesting in the mail?" he asked, buttering his toast without looking up. From his screen, I held up the envelope. The report from Dr. Rao. That got his attention. Gregory set down his phone and actually looked at me, though I could see him calculating how this news might affect his carefully constructed world. "What's the verdict?" I summarized the findings, watching his face shift through a series of micro-expressions. Concern, resignation, and something that looked disturbingly like relief. "Well," he said finally, "at least now we know what we're dealing with." He finished his breakfast in silence, and I could practically hear the wheels turning behind his perfectly styled hair. Gregory had always been a strategist, someone who thought 3 moves ahead. I could see him already planning how to manage this new development, how to frame it in a way that would minimize inconvenience to his public life. "I think we should keep this between us for now," he said, standing to rinse his coffee cup. "No need to worry Naomi unnecessarily." "Gregory, she's our daughter. She has a right to know." "Of course she does. But let's wait until we have a clearer picture of the timeline." Dr. Rao said the progression varies widely from person to person, right? Could be years before it becomes problematic. Problematic, as if my mind deteriorating was primarily a scheduling issue for him. He kissed my forehead on his way out, the same perfunctory gesture he'd been using for years. And I heard his car pull out of the driveway, while I was still sitting at the kitchen table, holding medical documentation of my uncertain future. That evening, I made Gregory's favorite, dinner, chicken and dumplings with green beans from our garden. I set the table with our good china, lit candles, opened a bottle of the Pinot Grigio he'd been saving for a special occasion. If we were going to discuss how this diagnosis would affect our lives together, I wanted to create the right atmosphere for an honest conversation. Gregory came home at his usual time, 6:45, calling out his arrival the way he always did. I heard him hang up his keys in the front hall, check the mail, pour himself a scotch from the bar cart in the parlor. All the familiar sounds of a man settling into his domestic routine. "Something smells wonderful," he said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his drink and that practiced smile he used when he wanted something to go smoothly. "I thought we should have a nice dinner together, to talk about the diagnosis and what it means for us. Us. He repeated the word like it was a foreign concept. Yes, well, I've been thinking about that all day. We sat down to eat, and I waited for him to begin the conversation I'd been imagining all afternoon. In my mind, it involved reassurances, planning, perhaps even a discussion of how we might make the most of whatever good time remained. Maybe we'd talk about traveling, about things we'd always meant to do but had put off for someday. Instead, Gregory launched into a detailed recap of his day at the station, a story about a city council meeting he'd covered, and his frustration with the camera operator's poor framing choices. He talked for 20 minutes without once mentioning the medical report that was still sitting on the kitchen counter. "Gregory," I finally interrupted, "we need to talk about this diagnosis." "Right, yes." He set down his fork and looked at me with the expression he typically reserved for interviewing grieving families, professionally sympathetic but emotionally detached. "I've been thinking, and I believe the best approach is to keep things as normal as possible for as long as possible, maintain routines, avoid stress, focus on enjoying each day." It sounded like something he'd rehearsed, possibly with someone else. "I'd like to call Naomi tomorrow," I said. "She should hear this from us, not find out some other way." "Absolutely. Though perhaps we should wait until after the Rotary Club. Dinner next weekend?" No need to have that conversation weighing on her during what I know is a busy time at school. Always calculating, always managing the narrative. "I'd also like to start getting my affairs in order," I continued. "Update my will, organize my papers, maybe write some letters to leave for Naomi." Gregory shifted uncomfortably. "Don't you think that's a bit premature? Dr. Rao said this could progress slowly. You might have years of relatively normal function. I might also have months. The point is, we don't know." "Exactly. So why rush into morbid preparations? Let's just take things one day at a time. One day at a time." From a man who planned his wardrobe a week in advance and kept detailed calendars for both personal and professional appointments. That night, I lay in bed listening to Gregory breathe beside me with the steady rhythm of someone sleeping peacefully, untroubled by existential anxiety. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time we'd had a conversation that felt real, where we'd talked about something that mattered beyond social obligations and household logistics. I couldn't remember. The next morning, Gregory left for work with unusual haste, barely finishing his coffee and declining the scrambled eggs I'd made. He had an early staff meeting, he explained. Important discussions about upcoming election coverage. I spent the morning in my garden, deadheading roses and pulling weeds, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of tending growing things. The physical work felt good, grounding. A reminder that my body still functioned even if my mind was becoming unreliable. I was pruning the climbing jasmine when I heard voices from Gregory's study window, which faced the back garden. He must have forgotten about the open window, or perhaps he assumed I was too far away to hear clearly. "I know the timing isn't ideal," he was saying, "but honestly, this might be the best thing that could happen." I moved closer to the house, staying low behind the azalea bushes. Think about it, Celeste. If her condition progresses the way the doctor expects, I'll be dealing with a very sick wife. People will be sympathetic. They'll understand that I need support, my hand stilled on the pruning shears. "I'm not saying we announce anything immediately," Gregory continued. "But in 6 months, a year, when it becomes obvious that she's not the woman I married who could blame me for finding companionship elsewhere." Companionship. Such a delicate word for betrayal. "The key is documentation," he went on. "I need to establish a clear timeline of her decline. Medical records, examples, of erratic behavior, evidence that she's no longer capable of being a real partner. I found myself thinking of Lady Macbeth, of how Shakespeare understood that the most chilling villains are the ones who plan their evil with careful logic. Gregory wasn't plotting in a fit of passion. He was strategizing my erasure with the same methodical approach he brought to investigative journalism. "What about tonight?" he asked. "Can you meet me at the usual place?" The usual place? They had a usual place. I stayed in the garden until I heard his car leave for the station, then came inside and called Dr. Rao's office. "I'd like to schedule an appointment," I told her receptionist. "Soon as possible." "Is this for a follow-up regarding your recent diagnosis?" "In a way. I need to discuss my options." 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Rao's office, overlooking the Ashley River, sunlight streaming through windows that made everything feel hopeful despite the circumstances. "How are you processing the diagnosis, Lena?" she asked. "Better than my husband is, apparently." Dr. Rao raised an eyebrow. She was younger than me, maybe 50, with silver threading through her black hair and the kind of direct gaze that invited honesty. "Tell me about that." I found myself explaining not just Gregory's reaction to the medical news, but his growing impatience with my symptoms over the past year. How he'd started making jokes about my forgetfulness, first privately, then in social situations, then, most recently, on his radio show. He's treating my diagnosis like a problem to be managed rather than a condition we're facing together. "That's unfortunately common," Dr. Rao said gently. "Spouses often struggle with the reality of cognitive decline. Some respond with increased protection and support. Others—" She paused diplomatically. "Others start planning their exit strategy. I can't comment on your husband's motivations, but I can tell you this. You're still very much yourself, Lena. This diagnosis doesn't change who you are or what you're capable of. It's a condition you're living with, not an identity you have to accept." "How much time do I have?" "Really?" Dr. Rao leaned back in her chair. "The honest answer is that we don't know. Some people with mild cognitive impairment never progress to full dementia. Others decline rapidly. Most fall somewhere in between. Years of relatively stable function followed by gradual changes. But I should make plans while I still can. Absolutely. Legal documents, advance directives, conversations with family members. But also plans for living, not just dying. What do you want to do with whatever time you have? What would make you feel like you're still fully engaged with life?" I thought about that question during the drive home, taking the long way through downtown Charleston, past the theater district, where I'd spent the happiest years of my professional life. The Charleston Stage Company was still there, though under different management now, still producing plays for audiences who understood that sometimes you need someone else's story to make sense of your own. What did I want to do with whatever clear time remained to me? I wanted to remember who I used to be before I became Gregory Marlowe's wife. I wanted to reclaim the part of myself that knew how to create drama, how to hold an audience, how to make people lean forward in their seats waiting to see what would happen next. That evening, Gregory came home full of excitement about a developing story, some municipal corruption he was investigating that might lead to a series of special reports. He talked through dinner about sources and research and the possibility of another Emmy nomination, his eyes bright with the kind of passion I hadn't seen directed toward me in years. "This could be really big, Lena. The kind of story that reminds people why local journalism matters." "That's wonderful, dear. I might need to work some irregular hours over the next few weeks. Late nights, weekend meetings with sources. You understand." I understood perfectly. After dinner, while Gregory retreated to his study to make phone calls, I went up to our bedroom and opened the cedar chest where I keep mementos from my theater days, programs, reviews, photographs, of casts I'd directed, awards I'd won back when I was Lena Hutchins, and the future felt like something I was actively creating. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in tissue paper, was a leather-bound address book I'd kept during my years at Charleston stage. Names and phone numbers of actors, writers, designers, technicians, all the people who understood that theater isn't just entertainment, it's transformation. Opened it to the first page and started making a list of people who might remember me, people who might help me stage one final performance. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The wedding photograph sits on Gregory's desk in a silver frame that I polish weekly, though I'm beginning to question why I maintain this ritual. In the picture, we're dancing at our reception, my head thrown back in laughter at something he's whispered in my ear. The photographer caught us mid-spin, my dress flowing around us like water, Gregory's hand firm on my waist. I was 23 in that photograph, 23, and directing my second season at Charleston stage, drunk on the possibility of building something meaningful with this charming man who interviewed actors for the cultural segment of the morning radio show. Gregory was 30 then, ambitious and magnetic, full of plans for conquering television news. When he proposed 6 months after we met, I said yes because I could see our whole future spread out like a script I was eager to perform. We'll be Charleston's power couple, he'd said, spinning me around the empty theater after a particularly successful opening night. You'll run the most prestigious theater in the Southeast, and I'll anchor the most watched news program in the state. I'd believed him. More than that, I'd believed in the vision of us working together, supporting each other's dreams while building something larger than either of us could achieve alone. Standing in his study now, looking at that photograph of two people who no longer exist, I try to remember when exactly we stopped being collaborators and I became simply an accessory to his ambitions. It might have been when the television station offered Gregory the weekend anchor position, and he suggested I take a sabbatical from theater to help him prepare for the increased visibility. Just temporarily, he'd promised, until I get established. Or perhaps it was when Naomi was born, and I discovered that managing an infant and a demanding toddler while Gregory traveled for stories was harder than directing 6 plays simultaneously. Theater will always be there, he'd said when I expressed frustration about missing auditions and production meetings. But our daughter needs her mother. The erosion was so gradual I didn't notice it happening until I looked up one day and realized I'd been missing from my own life for years. I'm dusting that silver frame when the phone rings. Gregory's study phone, not the main house line. It's 2:30 in the afternoon, and he's at the station preparing for the evening broadcast. So whoever is calling expects to reach his voicemail. Gregory, darling, I know you're working, but I had to hear your voice. The message plays through the speaker he never remembers to turn down. Last night was absolutely perfect. I keep thinking about what you said, about us having a real future, together. I know it's complicated, but I think I'm falling in love with you. Celeste's voice is honey and silk, tinged with that slight Georgia accent that makes everything sound more intimate. I stand frozen in place, dust cloth in hand, listening to my replacement declare her feelings for my husband. Call me when you can. I'm working late on the corruption story. I think I found another source who might talk. Love you. Love you. The words hang in the air like smoke after a stage fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. I replay the message, memorizing every inflection, every pause. In theater, you learn to analyze line readings, to understand what the subtext reveals about character motivation. Celeste's message isn't just about love. It's about possession, about claiming territory she considers already hers. I delete the message and continue dusting, my hands moving automatically, while my mind races. Last night was absolutely perfect. Suggests they've moved beyond occasional meetings to something more established, more intimate. What you said about us having a real future indicates Gregory has made promises, concrete plans for a life that doesn't include me. The corruption story gives me an idea. I call Evie Portman, my oldest friend and the owner of Magnolia Blooms, the florist shop where Charleston's elite order arrangements for every significant occasion in their lives. Evie has provided flowers for Gregory's station events for years, which means she has access to places I don't. "Honey, you sound strange," she says when I call. "Everything all right?" Evie has known me since we were 7 years old, building fairy houses in her grandmother's garden. She's the only person I trust to hear the whole truth. "Can you meet me for coffee? Today? It's important." An hour later, we're sitting in a corner booth at Kaminsky's, our usual spot when we need privacy for serious conversations. Evie orders her traditional chocolate cake while I pick at a croissant I don't want, both of us maintaining the pretense that this is a normal social visit until the server moves out of earshot. "All right," Evie says, forking cake with decisive movements. "What's Gregory done now?" I tell her everything. The overheard phone conversations, the suspicious behavior, Celeste's voicemail declaring her love. Evie listens without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "That absolute bastard," she says when I finish. 45 years of marriage, and he's planning to trade you in like a used car. The timing is what gets me, I admit. He's using my diagnosis as justification, as if my memory issues somehow excuse his infidelity. What are you going to do? It's the question I've been avoiding. The one that requires me to decide who I want to be in whatever time I have left. I could confront Gregory privately, demand couples counseling, fight for a marriage that might already be over. I could quietly separate, take my dignity and whatever settlement a good lawyer could negotiate. Or I could remember that I used to be someone who understood how to create drama. I want to expose him, I tell Evie, publicly. She nearly chokes on her cake. Lena. He's built his entire reputation on being Charleston's trusted voice, the man who investigates corruption and holds people accountable for their actions. What if that same standard were applied to him? You're talking about destroying his career. I'm talking about revealing the truth, the same thing he claims to do every night at 6. Evie stares at me for a long moment, and I can see her recalibrating, remembering the woman I used to be before I became professionally pleasant and eternally supportive. What do you need from me? Information, access. You deliver flowers to the station twice a week. You know the layout, the schedules, who works where. You're really going to do this? Gregory thinks my memory loss makes me helpless, that I'm no longer capable of strategic thinking. He's wrong about that. If anything, this diagnosis has clarified what actually matters. Evie reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. Tell me what you need. That evening, I cook dinner with extra care, preparing Gregory's favorite meal, while he works late at the station. I set the table with our wedding china, light candles, Choose a wine that will pair well with both the food and the conversation I'm planning to have. Gregory arrives home at 8:30, apologizing for the delay while hanging up his jacket and loosening his tie. He looks tired but satisfied, the way he always does after a productive day of journalism. Sorry, darling, this corruption story is heating up, and we wanted to make sure we had all our facts straight before we start airing segments. That sounds exciting, I say, bringing his plate to the table. Tell me about it. He launches into a detailed explanation of municipal contracts and kickbacks, his eyes bright with the thrill of investigative reporting. I listen and ask appropriate questions, playing the supportive wife role I've perfected over decades. The beautiful thing about this story, Gregory says, cutting into his steak, is that it's not complicated. These people thought they could hide their corruption behind legal language and bureaucratic procedures, but corruption is corruption. Eventually, the truth comes out. Eventually, I agree. Though sometimes it takes someone willing to shine a light in dark places. Exactly, that's what we do. Illuminate. Show people what's really happening behind the public facade. I pour him another glass of wine. And what happens to the people you expose? After the truth comes out, Gregory shrugs. They face the consequences of their choices. Public humiliation, legal repercussions, destroyed reputations. But that's not my responsibility. My job is just to report the facts. Just the facts. Right. Let the audience decide what to make of them. I smile and raise my glass. To truth and consequences. We drink to his toast, and I watch Gregory's face in the candlelight, memorizing his confidence, his satisfaction with a life built on professional integrity and personal deception. After dinner, he retreats to his study to make phone calls while I clean the kitchen and think about illumination. The next morning, while Gregory is at the gym, I drive to Charleston Stage Company for the first time in nearly 20 years. The building looks smaller than I remember, shabbier around the edges, but the familiar smell of sawdust and fabric and old dreams hits me as soon as I walk through the stage door. Can I help you? A young woman with purple hair and a clipboard looks up from what appears to be a props inventory. I'm looking for whoever's in charge. I used to work here many years ago. Oh, you're probably looking for Marcus. He's the artistic director. I think he's in his office. Marcus Chen turns out to be a man about my age, with kind eyes and hands, stained with paint. His office is a cramped space filled with scripts and design sketches. Exactly the kind of beautiful chaos I remember from my own directing days. Lena Hutchins, he says, standing when I introduce myself. Of course I know your work. You directed some legendary productions here. A long time ago. Not that long. I saw your Glass Menagerie in '98. Devastating. I still think about your staging choices for Laura's final scene. The compliment warms me more than I expected. I'm wondering if you might need some volunteer help. I have some free time these days. Marcus's eyes light up. Actually, we're always short-handed. Are you interested in directing again? I don't think so, but I'd be happy to help with whatever you need. Fundraising, community outreach, even just answering phones. Can you start Thursday? We're mounting The Tempest for our summer season, and I could use someone with your experience to help with patron relations. Thursday, 2 days from now. 2 days to begin remembering who I used to be. I shake his hand and agree to be there at 10, then drive home through downtown Charleston, past the television station where Gregory is probably preparing for the noon broadcast, past the hotel where I suspect he meets Celeste, past all the landmarks of a life I'm finally ready to stop pretending to want. That afternoon, I pull out my old theater contacts book and start making phone calls. Some numbers are disconnected, some people have moved away or died, but enough remain to form the nucleus of what I'm beginning to think of as my final cast. Lena. "Hutchins," says Tommy Morrison, who designed lights for half my productions. "I heard you disappeared into domestic bliss." Something like that. "Listen, Tommy, are you still doing technical work? Freelance these days. Why? I might have a project for you. Something with a live broadcast component. Sounds intriguing. Tell me more." I don't tell him more, not yet. But I add his name to a growing list of people who owe me favors, who remember when I was someone worth knowing, who might be willing to help me stage the most important performance of my life. That evening, Gregory comes home full of stories about the corruption investigation, how the mayor's office is starting to panic as more evidence surfaces. He talks through dinner about the responsibility of journalism, the importance of holding public figures accountable. "You know what I've always admired about you?" I tell him over dessert. "What's that?" "Your commitment to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be for people in power." Gregory preens at the compliment. "That's the job. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Even when the comfortable people are ones you know personally?" Especially then. Friendship can't compromise journalistic integrity. I nod thoughtfully. I imagine that takes real courage. It does, but that's what separates real journalists from mere entertainers. Real journalists. I wonder what category he'd place himself in if he knew I was sitting across from him, planning to apply his own standards to his personal life. After dinner, while Gregory makes his evening phone calls, I sit in the parlor with our wedding album spread across my lap, page after page of photographs, documenting a day that felt like the beginning of everything, when I thought I was marrying a partner, not auditioning for the role of supportive wife. The last photograph in the album shows us leaving the reception, Gregory's hand on the small of my back as we walk toward the car that would take us to our honeymoon. We're both laughing, my bouquet of white roses and baby's breath caught mid-toss toward the waiting crowd of single women. I remember that moment, the feeling of stepping into a future that seemed limitless and bright. I remember thinking that everything was possible, that love and ambition and shared dreams would carry us through whatever challenges might come. I was wrong about many things, but I was right about one. Everything was possible. I close the album and head upstairs, already planning tomorrow's visit to the Charleston stage company, already imagining the phone calls I'll make, the favors I'll call in, the careful choreography of revenge disguised as revelation. Gregory thinks my memory loss has made me weak and manageable. He's about to discover that while I may be forgetting where I put my reading glasses, I remember exactly how to hold an audience. The love letters were hidden behind Gregory's college yearbooks, tucked inside a manila envelope marked Tax Documents, 2019. I found them by accident while looking for our marriage certificate, which I needed for the appointment with my estate attorney. Dr. Rao had been right about getting my affairs in order while I still could think clearly. There were 17 letters total, printed emails dating back 8 months, all from Celeste to Gregory. I sat on the floor of his study, reading evidence of a relationship that had been developing in parallel to my medical diagnosis, and felt something shift inside me that had nothing to do with memory loss. The earliest letter was dated September 15th, 3 weeks after I'd first mentioned my concerns about forgetfulness to Gregory. Dearest Gregory, I can't stop thinking about our conversation after the staff meeting. You're right that marriage shouldn't be a prison sentence, especially when circumstances change so dramatically. I know this is complicated, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm here." I read that sentence 3 times, trying to parse its careful language. "Whatever you decide," suggested Gregory had already been discussing our marriage as a problem requiring a solution. Circumstances changed dramatically. Could only refer to my diagnosis, which meant he'd been confiding in Celeste about my condition from the very beginning. The letters grew progressively more intimate and more explicit about their future plans. By November, Celeste was writing about real estate listings she'd found, restaurants where they could dine without being recognized, weekend getaways to Savannah, where they could pretend to be the couple they were planning to become. "I know we have to be patient," she wrote in December, "but I've already started imagining our life together. A house with a proper home office for you. Maybe something in Mount Pleasant with water views. I could finally host dinner parties for interesting people instead of pretending to care about Junior League fundraisers. We could travel. You've always wanted to see Europe, and I know you'd love the history museums in Rome." My hands trembled as I read her casual dismissal of my entire social world, her assumption that Gregory's desires were somehow incompatible with our marriage. The Junior League fundraisers she mocked had raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for literacy programs. The dinner parties I'd hosted for 20 years had connected Gregory with sources, supporters, and influential community leaders who had advanced his career in ways she apparently couldn't see. But it was the February letters that broke something inside me. "Darling, I understand your frustration with the timeline, but we have to be strategic about this. If you simply leave her now, you'll look like the villain who abandoned his sick wife. But if you establish a clear pattern of her declining capacity, if there's documentation of her becoming increasingly difficult to live with, then your departure becomes understandable, even sympathetic. Establish a pattern. Documentation." She was coaching him on how to construct a narrative that would justify abandoning me. "Keep a journal of her worst moments." The letter continued. "Times when she's confused or inappropriate or forgetful in ways that affect your quality of life. Build a case that your marriage has become untenable through no fault of your own." I thought about Gregory's recent habit of correcting me in public, his increasingly frequent comments about my senior moments, his suggestion that I might be getting confused when I disagreed with him about anything. It hadn't been casual cruelty. It had been strategic documentation. The most recent letter, dated just last week, was the one that finally crystallized my resolve. "I love watching you work, the way you command a room, how people listen when you speak. You deserve a partner who enhances your professional reputation instead of diminishing it. Soon we won't have to hide what we have, and I can finally support your career the way it deserves to be supported. The way it deserves to be supported." As if 30 years of managing his social calendar, hosting his colleagues, editing his speeches, and providing emotional labor for his ambitions somehow didn't count as support. I photographed each letter with my phone, then carefully returned them to their hiding place behind the yearbooks. Gregory would never know I'd found them, would never suspect that his own words, preserved in Celeste's careful documentation, would become evidence in a different kind of case than either of them had imagined. That afternoon, I drove to the Charleston Stage Company for my second day of volunteer work. Marcus had given me a desk in the administrative office, and I was supposedly organizing donor files. But really, I was using their computer to research television production schedules and station protocols. "You're certainly thorough," said Janet, the development coordinator, watching me create detailed spreadsheets of information that had nothing to do with fundraising. "Old habits," I said. "I've always been a planner." What I was planning required precise timing and inside knowledge of how live television worked. I needed to understand camera positions, commercial breaks, who had access to which areas of the studio during broadcasts. Most importantly, I needed to know how to get myself into that studio without raising suspicion. Miles Beck, the former theater student who now worked as technical director at Gregory Station, was the key to everything. I'd taught Miles stagecraft when he was 16 and angry, a scholarship kid from North Charleston who'd been caught selling marijuana and sentenced to community service. The judge had assigned him to help build sets at Charleston Stage, expecting him to learn discipline through manual labor. Instead, he had discovered that he had an intuitive understanding of electronics and a gift for solving technical problems. I'd encouraged him to pursue engineering, helped him apply for colleges, even loaned him money for application fees when his mother couldn't afford them. Now he was 38, successful, and, according to the station's website, responsible for all the technical aspects of live broadcasts, including security systems and camera operations. I called him from the theater office, using my old director voice that brooked no argument. "Miles, this is Lena Hutchins. I need to see you." "Ms. Hutchins? Wow, it's been years. How did you... Can you meet me for coffee this afternoon? It's important." We met at a small cafe in West Ashley, far from downtown where anyone might recognize us. Miles looked exactly like I'd expected. Still thin, still slightly uncomfortable in social situations, but with the quiet confidence that comes from being very good at something technical and specialized. "I heard you married Gregory Marlowe," he said after we'd ordered. "That must be an interesting life." It has been, though perhaps not in the ways I expected. I studied his face, trying to determine how much he knew about the station's internal dynamics, whether he'd observed anything unusual about Gregory and Celeste's relationship. "How do you like working at the station?" Miles shrugged. "It's good work. Steady, decent pay, interesting technical challenges. Though the news business is changing pretty rapidly. Lot of pressure on everyone to do more with less. Including Gregory. Especially the on-air talent. Ratings are everything, and social media means every mistake gets amplified instantly. Your husband seems to handle the pressure pretty well, though." I sipped my coffee and made a decision to trust him. "Miles, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual about Gregory's behavior lately? Anything that might affect his professional reputation if it became public?" Miles's expression grew carefully neutral. "That's a pretty specific question, Ms. Hutchins." "Yes, it is." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing loyalties, professional obligations, and old affections. "There's been some talk," he said finally. "Nothing official, but people notice things. Late meetings that aren't on anyone's calendar, changes in normal routines, the kind of stuff that makes a small workplace uncomfortable." "Talk about Gregory and Celeste?" "I shouldn't. Miles, 30 years ago, I took a chance on a kid who needed someone to believe in him. I'm asking you to take a chance on me now." Another long pause. Then, "Yeah, Gregory and Celeste. It's gotten pretty obvious over the past few months, at least to those of us who work behind the scenes. We see everything. Who comes and goes, who stays late together, whose cars are in the parking lot when they shouldn't be. How obvious? Obvious enough that if someone wanted to document it, they could, but also subtle enough that they probably think they're being discreet. Documented. The same language Celeste had used in her letters. "Hypothetically," I said, "if someone wanted to make their relationship public, What would be the most effective way to do that? Miles stared at me. Miss Hutchins, what are you thinking about doing? I'm thinking about applying the same standards to my husband that he applies to the public figures he investigates. On live television? Hypothetically. Miles was quiet for so long I thought he might refuse to help. Then he pulled out his phone and started scrolling through what looked like technical schedules. Hypothetically, he said. The evening news broadcast has several built-in vulnerabilities. Live television always does. There are moments during the broadcast when things can go off script, when someone with the right access could make something unexpected happen. What kind of access? The kind that comes from being married to the anchor, and therefore trusted to be in the building. I felt something settle in my chest, a sense of rightness I hadn't experienced since my theater days. Miles, if I decided to pursue this hypothetical plan, would you help me? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw the 16-year-old boy who'd been angry at the world until someone gave him a chance to build something meaningful. You saved my life once, he said. Made me believe I could be someone other than what everyone expected. So, yeah, if you need help holding someone accountable for their actions, I'm in. That evening, I cooked Gregory's favorite dinner again. Seems I'm developing a pattern of feeding him well before delivering devastating news. He came home full of excitement about the corruption story, which was apparently reaching its climax. We're going live with the first segment tomorrow night, he said, loosening his tie and pouring himself a scotch. This is going to be huge. Lena, Pulitzer Prize-level journalism. That's wonderful, dear. You must be very proud. I am. It's the kind of work that reminds you why you got into journalism in the first place. Shining light on corruption, holding powerful people accountable for their actions. I smiled and poured myself a glass of wine. To accountability, we clinked glasses, and I watched Gregory bask in his own righteousness, completely unaware that his words were describing exactly what I was planning to do to him. After dinner, while he made his evening phone calls to sources and colleagues, I sat in the parlor reading the love letters I'd photographed, memorizing every damning detail. Celeste wrote like someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions, someone who believed that wanting something badly enough justified taking it. She was about to learn otherwise. At 10:30, Gregory's phone rang. I could hear his voice change when he answered, becoming warmer, more intimate. Celeste, darling. Yes, I know it's late. I moved closer to his study door. Tomorrow night, after the broadcast, we should celebrate. This story is going to change everything for both of us. Change everything. He was right about that, though not in the way he expected. I love you too, he said before hanging up. I stood in the hallway listening to those words, feeling them settle into the growing foundation of my resolve. Gregory had made his choice months ago. He just hadn't bothered to inform me officially. Well, I was about to make some choices of my own. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband while he slept peacefully, untroubled by guilt or remorse. I stared at the ceiling and thought about staging, about timing, about the difference between justice and revenge. In theater, the best dramatic moments come from character revelation, when someone shows the audience who they really are beneath their public persona. Gregory had built a career on revealing other people's hidden truths. It seemed only fair that he should experience the same kind of illumination. I'd spent decades supporting his ambitions, managing his image, helping him build a reputation for integrity and moral authority. Now I was going to help him live up to that reputation by applying his own standards to his own behavior. It would be the finest directing job of my career. The old theater contacts book felt like holding a piece of my former self. I'd kept it through decades of domestic life, moving it from apartment to house to the cedar chest upstairs, never quite able to throw away the evidence that I'd once been someone who mattered in a world beyond my husband's orbit. Now, sitting at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a cup of coffee, I was calling in favors I'd been saving for 30 years. "Lena Hutchins," said Patricia Vance when she answered her phone. My God, I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Patricia had been my stage manager on 3 productions, a woman who could coordinate actors, technicians, and designers with military precision. She'd moved to Atlanta after her divorce, worked her way up through regional theaters, and now managed special events for CNN's Southeast Bureau. "I've been otherwise occupied," I said. "But I have a project I think might interest you. Theater project? Performance art, with a live television component." I could hear her interest sharpen. Patricia had always loved technical challenges. The more complex, the better. "Tell me more." "I can't give you details over the phone, but it involves exposing corruption through dramatic revelation, the kind of thing you'd appreciate, given your current employer." "When and where?" "Charleston. This Friday evening. I'll pay your usual rate plus expenses." "Lena, you know I'd do it for free if you asked. What do you need from me?" "Your expertise in coordinating complex live events. And your discretion." "You've got both. Send me the details." Next, I called David Kim, a lighting designer who'd worked with me on experimental productions that pushed the boundaries between theater and reality. He was freelancing in New York now, designing for avant-garde companies that specialized in site-specific performance. "Lena, I was just thinking about that production we did in the old cotton warehouse. Still the most innovative staging I've ever worked on. I have something even more ambitious in mind. Are you available Friday evening for a one-night-only performance?" "For you?" "Absolutely. What's the venue?" "A television studio during a live news broadcast." Long pause. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious, and completely committed to making this happen, with or without professional help. I'd prefer to have the best people on my team. Count me in. This sounds like the kind of crazy that changes people's lives." He was right about that. By noon, I'd assembled a small but professional crew. Patricia to coordinate, David for lighting and visual effects, Tommy Morrison for technical support, and Sarah Chen, Marcus's daughter as it turned, out for video documentation. Each of them owed me something: a career break, a crucial recommendation, a loan during hard times. But more than that, they remembered what I'd been capable of when I was directing full-time. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Sarah asked when I called her. "What you're describing sounds like, well, like revenge." "It's accountability," I corrected. "Your father would understand the distinction. But the personal cost. Sarah, I'm 68 years old with a progressive neurological condition. My husband is planning to leave me for a younger woman and blame my illness for the failure of our marriage. What exactly do I have to lose?" That afternoon, I drove to the station for what Gregory thought was my first visit in years. He'd mentioned that I should stop by sometime to see the renovated newsroom, meet his colleagues, admire the state-of-the-art equipment that made his broadcasts possible. "Lena!" He stood up from his desk when I appeared in the newsroom doorway, his professional smile perfectly calibrated for public consumption. "What a wonderful surprise!" Several staff members looked up from their computers, curious to see the anchor's wife in their territory. I smiled and waved, playing the role of supportive spouse visiting her important husband's workplace. I was downtown for a doctor's appointment and thought I'd finally take you up on your invitation to see where the magic happens." Gregory beamed and began an extensive tour, introducing me to reporters and producers and technical staff, showing off the graphics department and the editing bays. I listened and admired appropriately while cataloging sightlines, noting camera positions, memorizing the layout. "And this is Celeste Quinn, my co-anchor," Gregory said when we reached her desk. Celeste stood gracefully, extending a perfectly manicured hand. She was even more beautiful in person than on television, with the kind of polished elegance that comes from professional styling and careful maintenance. "Mrs. Marlowe, what a pleasure to finally meet you. Gregory talks about you constantly." Her smile was warm and genuine, and for a moment I felt an unexpected stab of sympathy for her. She was young enough to believe that love conquered everything, that good intentions justified questionable actions. She probably told herself that she was saving Gregory from an unhappy marriage rather than destroying my life. "Please, call me Lena. And thank you for being such a wonderful partner to my husband. I know how much he enjoys working with you." "The feeling is mutual. Gregory is an incredible journalist and an even better mentor." Mentor. Such a delicate word for what she was receiving from him. "I hope you'll both come to dinner soon," I said. "I'd love to get to know Gregory's colleagues better." "That would be lovely," Celeste replied, and I could see her calculating whether such an invitation indicated suspicion or simple social courtesy. Gregory completed the tour by showing me the main studio where they filmed the evening news, a sleek space with multiple camera positions and sophisticated lighting systems. "Pretty impressive, isn't it?" he said, pride evident in his voice. "Very impressive, and I imagine quite complex to operate." "Oh yes, dozens of people coordinate every broadcast. Cameras, audio, graphics, teleprompter, commercial timing. It all has to work perfectly, or the whole thing falls apart. How vulnerable is it? I mean, what happens if something goes wrong during a live broadcast?" Gregory laughed. "That's why we have backup systems for everything. But honestly, live television is always a controlled disaster waiting to happen. The key is having experienced people who can think quickly when things go off script. Off script. I tucked that phrase away for later use. On my way out, I stopped by the technical department, where Miles was adjusting something complicated looking on a control panel. "Mrs. Marlowe," he said, looking appropriately surprised to see me. "Nice to have you visit the station. Miles was one of my former students," I told Gregory. "It's wonderful to see how successful he's become." We chatted briefly about his work, and I slipped him a piece of paper with my phone number, while Gregory was distracted by a colleague's question about the evening's broadcast schedule. That evening, Gregory came home energized by the positive response to his corruption story. The first segment had aired, and his phone had been ringing constantly with congratulations from colleagues and follow-up questions from other news outlets. "This is exactly the kind of journalism that matters," he said over dinner. "Holding powerful people accountable, showing the public what's really happening behind closed doors. It must be satisfying to expose hypocrisy," I said. "Incredibly satisfying. These people thought they could hide their corruption forever, but everything comes to light eventually. Truth has a way of revealing itself, even when it's inconvenient for people we care about. Especially then. Personal relationships can't compromise journalistic integrity. That's what separates real journalism from mere entertainment." I nodded thoughtfully. "I've always admired your commitment to that principle." After dinner, Gregory retreated to his study to prepare for the following day's coverage, while I called Patricia to finalize our plans. "I've reviewed the station layout you sent," she said. "The plan is ambitious but doable. David's flying in tomorrow morning, and Tommy's driving down from Columbia with the equipment we'll need. And you're certain about the legal aspects?" "Completely certain. What you're planning is dramatic revelation of factual information in a public forum. Technically, it's guerrilla theater, which has a long history of legal protection as artistic expression, even if it destroys someone's career. Lena, you're not destroying anything. You're revealing what already exists. If the revelation has consequences, that's because of the actions themselves, not your decision to make them public." That night, I took a sleeping pill. The first time I'd needed pharmaceutical help to rest in months. Tomorrow would require clear thinking and steady nerves, and I needed to be at my best for what might be the most important performance of my life. I dreamed about the early days of my theater career, when I was young and fierce, and absolutely certain that drama could change the world. In the dream, I was directing a play about betrayal and justice, and the audience was leaning forward in their seats, desperate to know how the story would end. I woke up Friday morning knowing exactly how this story would end. Miles called at 9 a.m. with the final details. "The evening broadcast starts at 6, he said. "Commercial breaks at 6:15, 6:30, and 6:45. The 6:30 break is your best window, 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Long enough for what you need to do, but short enough that management won't have time to intervene. And you can get me into the building. Delivery entrance at 5:45. I'll have a visitor's badge and a reason for you to be there. But Lena, once this starts, there's no stopping it. Are you absolutely sure?" I thought about the love letters hidden behind Gregory's yearbooks, about his phone calls with Celeste, about 45 years of marriage reduced to strategic planning for his next relationship. "I'm sure." Patricia arrived at noon with David and Tommy, and we spent the afternoon rehearsing in the Charleston Stage Company's main theater. Marcus had given us access without asking questions, trusting that whatever I was planning would be worth the theater's minor complicity. "The key is timing," Patricia explained as we ran through the sequence. "David will handle the lighting cues, Tommy will manage the audio, and I'll coordinate everything from my position near the studio entrance. You'll have exactly 3 minutes and 20 seconds to deliver your monologue and exit before they cut back to the newsroom. And if they try to stop me?" "They won't," David said confidently. "We're professionals, and this is live television. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, you'll be finished." Sarah arrived at 3 with her camera equipment, setting, up to document what she was calling the most elaborate act of feminist revenge in Charleston history. "It's not revenge," I corrected for the 10th time. "It's accountability." "Same thing," she said cheerfully, "when it's done this well." At 4 o'clock, I went home to prepare. I chose my outfit carefully, the emerald green dress I'd worn to our anniversary dinner 10 years ago, when Gregory had given me diamond earrings and promised we'd travel more, spend more time together, reconnect after years of him building his career. I did my makeup with the precision I'd once applied to stage makeup, knowing that television lights would wash out anything subtle. I styled my hair in the elegant updo that Gregory used to say made me look like Grace Kelly. I wanted to look beautiful. I wanted to look like someone worth keeping. At 5:30, I kissed Gregory goodbye as he left for the station. "See you after the broadcast," he said, checking his appearance in the hallway mirror. "I might be late. Celeste and I need to prepare." For tomorrow's follow-up segment. Of course, dear. I'll wait up. He drove away completely unaware that his wife was about to become the most important story he'd ever covered. I arrived at the station at 5:45 sharp, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. Miles was waiting at the delivery entrance, with a visitor's badge and a clipboard that made my presence look official. Mrs. Marlowe is here to discuss catering for the upcoming awards banquet, he told the security guard, who barely looked up from his sports magazine. Conference room B is available, the guard said, waving us through. Once inside, Miles led me through a maze of hallways to a storage room filled with lighting equipment and spare cameras. Patricia was already there, setting up what looked like a mobile command center with multiple phones and a tablet showing the live broadcast feed. Status report, she said without preamble. David's in position with the lighting board, Miles replied. Tommy's got the audio feed ready to patch through. Sarah's got her cameras set up in 3 locations for documentation. And our star is ready for her performance. They all looked at me expectantly. I thought about backing out, about walking away from this elaborate plan and simply confronting Gregory privately. Maybe seeking marriage counseling, or a dignified separation. Then I remembered Celeste's letter about establishing documentation of my decline, about building a case for my husband's abandonment of his sick wife. I'm ready. Through the storage room's small window, I could see into the main studio, where Gregory and Celeste were taking their positions behind the anchor desk. Gregory looked handsome and authoritative in his navy suit, every inch the respected journalist about to deliver important news to his community. Celeste was radiant in burgundy silk, her blonde hair catching the studio lights perfectly. They made a beautiful couple. 15 minutes to airtime, Patricia announced, monitoring the broadcast feed on her tablet. I pulled out the speech I'd written and memorized, 3 pages of carefully crafted revelation that would expose Gregory's affair while maintaining my dignity. I'd practiced it dozens of times, timing each pause, each emphasis, each moment of dramatic impact. 10 minutes to airtime. Through the studio window, I watched Gregory and Celeste run through their opening segment, their heads bent together. Over the script, even from a distance, I could see the intimacy between them, the way they leaned into each other's space with the comfortable familiarity of lovers. 5 minutes to airtime. Miles handed me a wireless microphone, tiny and nearly invisible when clipped to my dress. This will patch directly into the broadcast audio. Once I activate it, everything you say will go out live to 30,000 households. 30,000 people. More than had ever seen one of my theater productions. The largest audience of my performing career. 2 minutes to airtime. I could hear the familiar countdown through the speakers, the orchestrated chaos of a news broadcast, coming together. Graphics loaded, cameras found their marks, teleprompters rolled to their starting positions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is WCHS News at 6 with Gregory Marlowe and Celeste Quinn. The red light on camera 1 flashed, and Gregory's television smile bloomed across his face. Good evening, I'm Gregory Marlowe. And I'm Celeste Quinn. Tonight, continuing coverage of the municipal corruption scandal that has rocked Charleston's city government. I watched my husband deliver the news with practiced authority, his voice carrying that perfect blend of gravity and accessibility that had made him Charleston's most trusted anchor. He was good at his job. I'd never denied that. He understood how to connect with an audience, how to make people believe that he was telling them the truth. Tonight I was going to show them what truth actually looked like. The first commercial. Break came at 6:15, and I could see Gregory and Celeste chatting quietly during the break, her hand resting briefly on his arm. Even during commercial breaks, they couldn't resist touching each other. "Next break is our window," Patricia said. "Everyone ready?" David's voice crackled through our communication system. "Lighting ready," Tommy. "Audio ready?" Sarah. "Cameras rolling." Miles. "Building access secured." The broadcast resumed with Gregory introducing the second segment of his corruption investigation. I listened to him talk about accountability and transparency, about the importance of holding public figures to high ethical standards. "Public trust is sacred," he intoned directly into camera 2. "When that trust is violated through deception and self-interest, it damages not just the individuals involved, but the entire community that depends on their integrity." The irony was almost too perfect. "Coming up after the break," Celeste said, her voice warm and professional. "We'll have a follow-up on yesterday's school board meeting and your weekend weather forecast. Stay with us," Gregory added. "We'll be right back." The commercial break began at exactly 6:30. Patricia stood up, checking her watch. "This is it. Everyone in position." Miles activated my microphone and opened the studio door. "You've got 3 minutes and 20 seconds, Lena. Make them count." I walked into the studio on legs that felt steadier than they had in months. The bright lights, the cameras, the sense of controlled energy. It all felt like coming home after a very long exile. Gregory and Celeste were reviewing notes for the next segment when I appeared in their peripheral vision. Gregory looked up, first his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to growing alarm as he realized I was wearing a wireless microphone. "Lena, what are you—" "Good evening, Charleston," I said, walking toward camera 2 with the confidence of someone who belonged in front of an audience. "My name is Lena Marlowe, and I have something important to tell you about truth and accountability." Behind me, I could hear Gregory's sharp intake of breath, could sense the controlled panic spreading through the studio as producers and technicians realized that something had gone drastically off script. My husband, Gregory Marlowe, has built his reputation on exposing corruption and holding public figures accountable for their actions. Tonight I'm going to apply those same standards to him. I could see the red light on camera 2, knew that my words were being broadcast live to every household in Charleston that was watching the evening news. There was no going back now, no way to take back what I was about to reveal. For the past 8 months, while I've been dealing with a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, my husband has been having an affair with his co-anchor, Celeste Quinn. But more than that, he's been planning to leave me and blame my medical condition for the failure of our marriage. The studio was dead silent except for the hum of equipment and the distant sound of producers frantically trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. I found love letters that show how they've been strategizing my erasure, planning to document my decline so that Gregory's abandonment of his sick wife would seem not just understandable, but sympathetic. I turned slightly to include Gregory and Celeste in the camera frame. They sat frozen behind the anchor desk, Celeste pale and stricken, Gregory's face cycling through emotions too quickly for television to capture. My husband talks every night about the importance of truth, about holding people accountable for their actions. Well, Gregory, here's your accountability moment. I pulled out copies of Celeste's letters and held them up to the camera. These are love letters from Celeste Quinn to my husband, detailing not just their sexual relationship, but their careful planning of how to justify abandoning me. "Keep a journal of her worst moments," she wrote. "Build a case that your marriage has become untenable through no fault of your own." Behind me, I could hear shuffling, urgent whispers, the sound of people trying to decide whether to cut the feed or let this play out. Charleston, you've trusted my husband to tell you the truth about corruption in your government. I'm here to tell you the truth about corruption in my marriage. Gregory Marlowe is not the man of integrity he pretends to be on television. He's a man who mocks his wife's medical condition on the radio, who plans to abandon her when she becomes inconvenient, and who uses his public platform to build credibility he doesn't deserve in his private life. I looked directly into the camera, remembering every technique I'd ever learned about connecting with an audience. I'm 68 years old, and I'm losing my memory, but I remember who I used to be before I became Gregory Marlowe's wife. I was Lena Hutchins, and I directed theater. I understood drama, timing, and the power of truth to transform a story. Tonight I'm directing my final production, The Studio. Lights were hot on my face, but I felt clearer than I had in months. Gregory, you wanted documentation of my decline? Here's your documentation. I'm smart enough to discover your affair, strategic enough to plan this exposure, and strong enough to reclaim my dignity in front of 30,000 witnesses. If that's cognitive decline, I'll take it. I could see the floor director making cutting motions with his hand, could sense the panic in the control room, but nobody seemed willing to pull the plug on live television featuring the anchor's wife. Celeste, you wrote that Gregory deserves a partner who enhances his professional reputation instead of diminishing it. You're right about that. He does deserve that kind of partner. Unfortunately, neither of us is that partner anymore. I turned back to the camera for my closing. Charleston, this is what accountability looks like when it's applied equally. My husband will continue to investigate corruption in your city government, and you can decide for yourselves whether a man who betrays his own marriage vows has the moral authority to judge anyone else's ethics. I unclipped the microphone and set it gently on the anchor desk. Gregory, I'll be staying with our daughter for the foreseeable future. My attorney will be in touch about the divorce. I walked off the set as calmly as I'd entered, past shocked technicians and frozen producers, through the studio door where Patricia was waiting with my purse and car keys. How was that? I asked her. Fucking magnificent, she said. Let's get you out of here. We walked through the hallways of the television station while behind us, I could hear the sound of complete organizational meltdown. By the time we reached the parking lot, my phone was already ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Turned it off and drove straight to Naomi's house in Columbia, where I would watch my performance on the late-night news and finally understand what it felt like to be unforgettable. The video had already gone viral by the time I reached Naomi's house. My daughter met me at her front door with her laptop open, her face cycling between admiration and horror as she watched her mother's television debut for the third time. Mom, do you have any idea what you've just done? I set down my overnight bag and looked at the screen, where my own image was frozen mid-speech, one hand holding Celeste's letters, my expression calm and determined. I told the truth. You destroyed Dad's career on live television. I held him accountable for his actions, using the same standards he applies to everyone else. Naomi closed the laptop and stared at me. Are you sure you're okay? I mean, cognitively, because this seems like a lot. I almost laughed. Even my own daughter was questioning my mental capacity rather than Gregory's moral character. Sweetheart, I planned this for weeks. I coordinated with 5 different professionals, timed everything to the second, and delivered a 3-minute speech without notes while being broadcast live to 30,000 people. If that's what cognitive decline looks like, your father should be worried about his own mental state. My phone, despite being turned off, was somehow still managing to notify me of incoming calls. I turned it back on long enough to see 47 missed calls and uncounted text messages before switching it off again. "The story's everywhere," Naomi said, reopening her laptop. "Local news, social media, even some national outlets are picking it up. Wife exposes cheating husband on live TV is trending on Twitter." She showed me the headlines scrolling across her screen. "Charleston anchor's wife hijacks news, broadcast to expose affair. Live TV revenge. Woman with memory loss. Delivers unforgettable. Take down. Theater director turned housewife. Stages final performance. This is incredible, Mom. Look at the comments." The responses were overwhelmingly supportive. Hundreds of people praising my courage, sharing their own stories of betrayal and abandonment, calling for Gregory's resignation. A few criticized my methods, but even those seemed to admire the execution. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen on live television. Gregory Marlowe has been sanctimonious for years. About time someone called him out. This woman is my hero. Imagine being betrayed like that and having the strength to fight back so brilliantly. She said she's losing her memory, but that performance was unforgettable. Naomi scrolled through dozens of similar responses, and I could see her processing the realization that her mother had just become a folk hero. "Dad's been calling me non-stop," she said finally. "I haven't answered." "You should call him back. He's still your father." "Is he? Because the man I saw on that broadcast looked like a stranger." I sat down on her couch, suddenly exhausted by the adrenaline crash. Planning the performance had kept me energized for weeks, but now that it was over, I felt the weight of what I'd just destroyed. "I know this is hard for you," I said. "He's your father, and despite everything, he loves you. This was between him and me. Mom, he was planning to leave you because you're sick. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who sees marriage as a contract that becomes void when one party stops being useful. But I didn't say that to Naomi." My phone rang again, and this time I recognized the number. Dr. Rao. "Lena, I just saw the news coverage. Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. What you did tonight, it took incredible strength and planning. Your organizational skills, your timing, your ability to perform under pressure. None of that suggests cognitive decline. That's what I've been trying to tell people. I think we should schedule some follow-up testing. I'm beginning to wonder if your memory issues might be stress-related rather than neurological. Stress-related. The idea that my symptoms might be caused by living with a man who was slowly erasing me from my own life had never occurred to me." "We'll talk soon," Dr. Rao continued. "But Lena, I'm proud of you. What you did tonight was brave and important." After she hung up, I sat in Naomi's living room watching the late-night news coverage of my impromptu broadcast. Every local station was covering the story, and several had reached out to theater colleagues who remembered my directing career. "Lena Hutchins was a force of nature," said Marcus Chen in an interview outside Charleston Stage Company. "She understood drama, timing, and how to hold an audience. Tonight reminded us that she still does. She was always the smartest person in the room," added Tommy Morrison. Gregory Marlowe had no idea who he was married to. Even Evie had been interviewed, standing in front of her flower shop, with her arms crossed and her expression fierce. "Lena's been my best friend for 60 years, she told the reporter. "She's one of the strongest, most intelligent women I know. If Gregory thought her memory issues made her weak, he seriously underestimated his wife." Around midnight, Naomi and I were interrupted by a knock at the door. Through the window, we could see Gregory's car in the driveway. "I'll handle this," Naomi said. But I stood up. "No, I will." Gregory looked terrible, his hair disheveled, his tie loosened, his professional composure completely gone. He'd aged 10 years in 6 hours. "Lena, we need to talk. I think we've said everything that needs saying. You destroyed my career. On live television. In front of the entire city. I revealed the truth about your character. You destroyed your own career through your choices. You made me look like a monster. I made you look like exactly what you are. A man who betrays his wife and mocks her illness. If that makes you look like a monster, perhaps you should examine your actions, not my revelation of them." Gregory's face twisted with frustration. "This isn't you, Lena. This vindictive, calculating person. This isn't who you are." "You're right. This isn't who I've been for the past 30 years. But it's exactly who I used to be before I gave up my career to support yours. Before I became Mrs. Gregory Marlowe, instead of Lena Hutchins." "You're sick. You're not thinking clearly. Gregory, I coordinated 5 professionals, hijacked a live television broadcast, and delivered a flawless 3-minute performance without a script. If I'm sick, I'm the most competent sick person you'll ever meet." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with the confused, declining wife he'd been describing to Celeste. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you face the consequences of your choices, the same thing you expect from every person you investigate." "And us?" "There is no us. There hasn't been for months, maybe years. You made that clear in your letters to Celeste." Gregory's shoulders sagged. "I never meant for it to happen this way." "You meant for it to happen exactly this way. You just didn't expect me to have any say in the timeline." After he left, Naomi and I sat up talking until dawn. She told me about her marriage, about how she'd stayed longer than she should have because she thought being divorced would disappoint me and Gregory. I told her about the years I'd spent being professionally pleasant while slowly disappearing inside my own life. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said as the sun came up over Columbia. "What you did took incredible courage. What I did took incredible anger. I'm not sure that's the same thing. Sometimes they are." The next morning brought a flood of interview requests from national news outlets, book agents wanting to discuss my story, and theatrical producers interested in turning my experience into a stage play. I declined them all except one, a request from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to explore the intersection of memory, marriage, and public performance. "Your story isn't just about revenge," she explained during our phone conversation. "It's about reclaiming identity, about refusing to be erased. That's a story worth telling." 2 weeks later, I was living in a small apartment near the theater district, close enough to walk to Charleston Stage Company, where I'd started volunteering full-time. Marcus had offered me a position as artistic consultant, helping to develop new works that blurred the lines between theater and real life. "You've reminded us that the most powerful drama happens when people stop pretending," he said during my first official day back, "when they drop their masks and show the audience who they really are." Gregory resigned from the television station the day after my broadcast, citing personal matters that required his immediate attention. Celeste took over as sole anchor, though she never quite recovered her credibility after being exposed as a homewrecker on live television. The divorce proceedings were swift and relatively amicable. Gregory's lawyer tried to argue that my mental condition made me unsuitable for certain financial decisions, But my performance on live television had made that argument laughable. I kept the house, he kept his pension, and we both kept our dignity intact as much as possible. The most unexpected outcome was my health. Dr. Rao's follow-up tests showed significant improvement in my cognitive function. The memory issues that had seemed so frightening turned out to be largely stress-related, symptoms of living with someone who was systematically undermining my sense of self. "The brain is remarkably plastic," she explained during my appointment. "Remove the source of chronic stress, reclaim your sense of agency and purpose, and often the symptoms improve dramatically." 6 months after my television debut, I was directing, again, a new play about marriage, betrayal, and the courage it takes to rewrite your own story. The production was selling out every night, drawing audiences who wanted to see if the woman who'd hijacked a news broadcast could create equally compelling drama on stage. Opening night, I stood in the wings watching actors I'd guided bring my words to life under lights that David Kim had designed specifically for this production. The audience was leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed in a story about a woman who refuses to be forgotten. In the front row, Naomi was crying. Next to her sat Evie, Dr. Rao, Miles, and all the people who had helped me remember who I was before I became someone else's wife. As the curtain fell to thunderous applause, I realized that Gregory had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't my final performance. It was my encore. 1 year later, I was arranging white roses in a different vase in a different house when the letter arrived. Not the elegant crystal vase from my marriage, but a simple ceramic one I'd bought at a local pottery studio, made by an artist who understood that beauty doesn't require perfection. The return address read, Quinn & Associates Public Relations, and for a moment I wondered if Celeste had started her own business. Then I opened it and realized it was from her attorney. "Ms. Quinn is writing a book about her experiences in television journalism," the letter explained, "and would like to include a chapter about the events surrounding her departure from WCHS. She would appreciate the opportunity to interview you about your perspective on those events." I set the letter down next to my coffee cup and laughed. Actually laughed out loud in my sunny kitchen, overlooking a garden I was learning to tend without the pressure of maintaining appearances. Celeste wanted to interview me. The woman who'd helped plan my erasure now wanted my perspective for her book about television journalism. I picked up my phone and called Evie. "She wants to what?" Evie's voice carried the same indignation I'd felt reading the letter. "Interview me for her book about journalism." The absolute audacity of that woman. "Are you going to respond?" I looked around my small apartment near the theater district, at the walls covered with programs from productions I was directing again, at the comfortable furniture I'd chosen without considering anyone else's preferences. "Actually, I think I am." I called the number on the letter and reached Celeste's assistant, who seemed surprised that I was willing to participate. "Ms. Quinn was hoping you might meet for coffee," the assistant explained. "Somewhere private where you could have an honest conversation." "I'll meet her," I said, "but not for coffee. Tell her to come to the Charleston Stage Company tomorrow evening at 8. I'll be in rehearsal for my new production." The next evening, Celeste arrived at the theater, looking like she was dressed for a job interview. Conservative suit, minimal makeup, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. She seemed smaller somehow, less commanding than she'd appeared on television or in my memory. I was working with actors on the final scene of Reclamation, the play I'd written about marriage and betrayal and the courage it takes to rewrite your own story. The scene we were rehearsing involved a woman confronting her ex-husband and his new wife, demanding accountability for their deception. Hold that pose, I called to the actors, then walked down the aisle to where Celeste was standing uncertainly, in the back of the theater. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said, extending her hand. I didn't take it. What do you want to know? I'm trying to understand what happened that night. Your motivations, your planning process, for the book. You're writing a book about journalism, and you want to interview the woman whose marriage you helped destroy. Do you see the irony in that? Celeste shifted uncomfortably. I want to tell the full story, all perspectives. Whose idea was it to document my decline? Yours or Gregory's? She went very still. I'm not sure what you mean. In your letters to my husband, yes, I found them. You specifically suggested that he keep a journal of my worst moments to build a case for leaving me. I'm curious whether that was your original idea, or if Gregory was already thinking along those lines. Those letters were private communications. Those letters were evidence of conspiracy to commit emotional abuse. I'm asking you a simple question for your book. Whose idea was it? Celeste looked around the theater, perhaps hoping for an escape route, then back at me. It was mine, she said quietly. Gregory was feeling guilty about us, about his feelings for me while you were dealing with your diagnosis. I suggested that if he documented your condition, it would help him process his guilt. Help him process his guilt by building a case against me. It wasn't supposed to be against you. It was supposed to be practical, honest, about the reality of your situation. I walked back toward the stage, gesturing for her to follow. The actors had taken a break, leaving the set lit with soft amber lights that made everything look warm and intimate. Do you know what this play is about, Celeste? I assume it's about what happened between us. It's about a woman who discovers that the people she trusted most were planning her erasure. But instead of accepting that erasure, she chooses to rewrite the story with herself as the protagonist instead of the victim. I turned to face her directly. You helped my husband plan to abandon me during a medical crisis, and now you want to interview me for a book about journalism ethics. Do you understand how deeply fucked up that is? Celeste flinched at my language. I was in love. People do terrible things when they're in love. People do terrible things when they prioritize their own comfort over other people's humanity. Love doesn't excuse cruelty, Celeste. It certainly doesn't excuse calculated cruelty. I never meant to hurt you personally. What did you think would happen? That I would gracefully disappear so you and Gregory could have your perfect life without the inconvenience of his sick wife? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the stage where my actors had been exploring themes of accountability and forgiveness. I thought you wouldn't remember, she said finally. I thought your memory loss would make everything easier. The honesty of it was breathtaking in its callousness. Well, I said, I hope you've learned something about underestimating women with memory issues. Your television appearance changed everything for me, Celeste continued. I lost my job, my reputation, any chance of working in journalism again. I had to start over completely. Good, that's what accountability looks like. But it wasn't. Just me. Gregory lost everything, too. Gregory made his choices. You both did. You just didn't expect me to have any say in the consequences. I could see her struggling with whether to continue, whether to reveal whatever she'd really come here to discuss. He blames me, she said finally, for everything. For the affair, for getting caught, for his destroyed career. He says I manipulated him into leaving you. Did you? I don't know anymore. I thought I was in love. I thought we were building something real together. But after your broadcast, everything fell apart so quickly. Gregory became bitter, angry, constantly talking about how you'd ruined his life out of spite. Where is Gregory now? He's working for a small radio station in Myrtle Beach. Local sports and weather. We broke up 6 months ago. I felt an unexpected wave of sympathy for her, quickly followed by irritation at my own compassion. What do you want from me, Celeste? I want to understand how you found the strength to do what you did. How you went from being how you were to being someone who could plan and execute something that's sophisticated. From being how I was, meaning weak, confused, manageable. I remembered who I used to be, I told her. Before I became Gregory's wife, I was Lena Hutchins. I directed theater, I made things happen. I understood how to hold an audience and tell a story that mattered. Your affair and Gregory's cruelty reminded me that I was still that person, underneath all the years of being professionally pleasant. But the planning, the coordination, was exactly the kind of complex project management I used to do every day when I was directing. The only difference was that instead of staging steel magnolias, I was staging justice. Celeste looked around, the theater again, taking in the posters for past productions, the photos of actors I'd directed, the evidence of a creative life that had existed long before she had tried to erase it. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what we did to you, for what I did. I appreciate the apology, but I didn't agree to meet with you to receive your guilt or grant your absolution. Then why did you agree to meet with me?" I gestured toward the stage, where my play about reclamation was set to open in 2 weeks. Because I wanted you to see what's possible when a woman refuses to be erased. I wanted you to understand that your attempt to disappear me actually helped me remember who I was. For your book about journalism ethics, I continued, you might want to explore the concept that personal integrity and professional credibility are connected. That a person who betrays intimate relationships can't be trusted to report honestly about public ones. Celeste nodded, taking notes in a small leather journal. You might also explore the idea that women over 60 aren't disposable, that marriage isn't a contract that becomes void when one party develops health problems, and that underestimating someone with memory issues can be a serious strategic error. Will you read the chapter before I publish it? No. You're a journalist. At least you were. You should be able to write accurately about events you participated in without my editorial assistance. I walked her to the theater's exit, through the lobby where photos of my recent productions covered the walls. Celeste? For what it's worth, I hope you find whatever you're looking for, but you won't find it by writing books about the people whose lives you helped destroy. After she left, I returned to the theater where my actors were ready to resume rehearsal. We worked until nearly midnight, refining the final scene where the protagonist chooses forgiveness, not for her betrayer's sake, but for her own freedom. The play opened 2 weeks later to sold-out audiences and reviews that described it as a masterpiece of personal and political theater. The theater critic for the Charleston city paper wrote that I had transformed personal trauma into universal art, creating a work that speaks to anyone who has ever been underestimated or written off. On closing night, I stood in the wings watching the final performance, surrounded by the actors and technicians who had helped me tell this story. In the audience, I could see Naomi in the front row, tears streaming down her face, as the protagonist delivered her final monologue about the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. After the curtain call, After the flowers and congratulations, and promises to work together again, I drove home to my small apartment where I've been living exactly the life I want. I wake up when I choose, tend a garden that doesn't have to look perfect, and spend my days creating drama instead of enduring it. 6 months ago, Celeste's book was published. The chapter about our situation portrayed her as a naive young woman, swept up in a complicated romance, with me as the vindictive wife who destroyed 2 careers out of spite. The book received terrible reviews and sold poorly. But that's not why I'm telling this story. I'm telling this story because I want other women to know that being forgotten doesn't mean you have to disappear. That memory loss doesn't equal powerlessness. That the people who underestimate you because of your age or your health condition or your supposed irrelevance might be making a serious strategic error. I'm 69 now, and my memory is better than it's been in years. Dr. Rao says that reclaiming my sense of purpose and removing chronic stress from my life probably added years to my cognitive function. I direct 3 productions a year, mentor young theater artists, and occasionally give talks about the intersection of aging and creativity. The crystal vase from my marriage sits in storage, chipped and forgotten. But every morning I arrange fresh flowers in my ceramic vase, and I remember that beauty doesn't require perfection. It just requires attention and care. Gregory writes occasionally, brief emails asking about my health and our daughter. I respond politely but without warmth. We're divorced now, legally and emotionally, and I wish him well from a distance that will never shrink. Sometimes people ask if I regret what I did that night on live television, if I wish I'd handled my discovery of the affair differently. The answer is no. I regret spending 30 years forgetting who I was before I became someone's wife. I regret allowing other people to define my worth based on my utility to them. I regret believing that being professionally pleasant was more important than being authentically myself. But I don't regret reclaiming my voice, my agency, and my right to write my own story. I don't regret refusing to be erased. And I certainly don't regret proving that a woman with memory issues can be absolutely unforgettable when she chooses to be. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.